Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today's topic is all about Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children that was published during the year 1981. So, this novel, as you all know, portrays India's transition from British colonial rule to independence and, of course, the partition of India. So it is obviously considered to be the best example of post-colonial, postmodern and magical realist literature. So our topic being migration and identity crisis of Saleem Sinai in Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children. Here we go to explore the character and of course the frequent displacements and exile of Saleem Sinai. Well, Saleem Sinai, the protagonist. So, Saleem Sinai is the protagonist of the Booker Prize winning novel Midnight Children. His life is closely intertwined with the events that take place in his homeland of pre and post colonial India and the newly created Pakistan and Bangladesh. Saleem Sinai is the owner of a pickle factory in Bombay, India, and he cohabits with Padma, one of the women laborers of his business. Born in 1947, Sinai was orphaned during the 1965 war with Pakistan over the now independent state of Bangladesh. So we'll see something about Saleem's divided identity. The biological parents of Saleem Sinai being the Hindu woman Vanita and the British Methwald. Of course, he's not Vanita's husband. So the name tags at the hospital gets changed. And obviously, the poor Anglo-Indian baby gets a chance to be raised up in the household of the rich Muslim businessman Ahmed Sinai. Instead, the child born to Ahmed Sinai gets to be raised at the household of the poor Hindu woman Vanita. Saleem Sinai is raised up at the Sinais by the Christian ayah Mary Pereira. So, of course, you could understand how Saleem's identity gets divided. Well, the multiple voices. So this reflects the power of Saleem Sinai and the other Midnight Children born in the exact hour of Indian independence. So the telepathic abilities of Saleem makes him quite remarkable as he could read the minds of people as well as converse with other Midnight Children. Saleem acts as a telepathic conduit, bridging hundreds of geographically disparate children into contact. He attempts to discover the meanings of their gifts. And for example, Shiva of the knees, Saleem's nemesis, and Parvati, otherwise called as Parvati the witch, are two of these children with notable gifts and roles in Saleem's story. So, Rushdie, through the multiple voices within Saleem Sinai and the other Midnight Children, celebrates the diversity and multicultural identity of India. So, being one of the Midnight Children, Saleem Sinai is the worst sufferer of migration in the novel. He experiences frequent exiles and dislocations. As the child of Ahmed Sinai, Saleem enjoys the status as the heir of the Sinai family, of course, in the beginning. And later, he was indeed abandoned by his parents all of a sudden. So Saleem's blood group reveals that he is not the son of Ahmed Sinai. Abandoned by his parents, he is left to the refuge of his uncle Hanif. Saleem understands the torment of being in exile as he confirms that is the beginning of his first exile. So, Saleem feels isolated even after returning back to his home. So everything is not going to be the same again. Even after returning home, Saleem Sinai feels alienated just because of his parentage and admits that his previous position has been usurped. So we'll see about yet another migration in the life of Saleem Sinai. Saleem Sinai moves to partition created frontier into Pakistan along with his mother and sister due to the separation of his parents. Ahmed Sinai stays back in India. So the consequences of migration makes him suffer a merely partial erasure from the society. Of course, he belongs nowhere now. He experiences the rejection of past as well as the family. And now, look at this. Saleem's peculiar gift of conversing with the midnight children is severed off. So he has to leave his lifelong home in Bombay and he discovers the existence of a frontier that really cut off all the thought transmissions between himself and the other midnight children that he used to have previously. So he's exiled once more. And he, of course, mourns his departure as he says, I was also exiled from my truest birthright, the gift of the midnight's children. So he feels very sad about that. And Saleem's nostalgic memory of Bombay. So just like Salman Rushdie, Saleem Sinai too reflects a nostalgic memory of Bombay. So we'll see a quote from the text which shows Saleem's yearning for going back to Bombay. So 4 years away from the midnight children, 4 years without Warren Road and Bridge Candy and Scandal Point and the lures of 1 yard of chocolates, away from the cathedral school and the equestrian statue of Shivaji and melon sellers at the gateway of India, away from Diwali and Ganesh Chaturthi and Coconut Day. 4 years of separation from a father who sat alone in the house he would not sit. So, this reflects Saleem's nostalgic yearning for his Mumbai. So, the Sinais, now back in Pakistan, are mere dependents and misfits. So, Saleem, his mother, and sister are well established social inferiors, or in other words, the hapless poor relations of the great Zulfiqars in Pakistan. They become the dependents of their relations and stay as misfits in the alien land. Their roots were severed off from Bombay, which Saleem adores a lot. So now comes their decision to put down their roots of Bombay. So soon the whole family, including Ahmed Sinai, sets back to Pakistan permanently with the hope of turning into new people. So Saleem's parents finally decide to put down roots. Saleem never forgave Karachi for not being Bombay. So the memory and staunch attachment that he has for Bombay is highly remarkable, and it coincides with Salman Rushdie's attachment to the city. Well, so now comes the purification of the Sinais. So Saleem Sinai declines the history of Pakistan. So he doesn't feel a part of Pakistan and its pure culture. Instead, Salim Sinai, just like Rushdie, he longs for the diverse culture of India. So Salim's parents aspires to become citizens of Pakistan. So now Salim Sinai is condemned to be a misfit in Pakistan. So the Muslim ideals of purity really shocks him back at Pakistan. The cultural differences. So, the cultural differences between Bombay and Pakistan are clearly brought out by Rushdie. So Saleem's parents said, I quote from the text, "We must all become new people in the land of the pure." Purity became our ideal. So now, uh, born and brought up from Bombay, Saleem Sinai finds it too difficult to accept the purity or the pure ideology of Pakistan. So he is used to the multicultural setup of Bombay. He's not used to something that is too pure in its culture. So, but Saleem was forever tainted with Bombayness. His head was full of all sorts of religions apart from Allah's, like India's first Muslims, the mercantile Maplas of Malabar. So I had lived in a country whose population of deities rivaled the number of its people, so that in unconscious revolt against the claustrophic throng of deities, my family had espoused the ethics of business, not faith. So, and his body was to show a market preference for the impure, Mopler like. I was doomed to be a misfit. But in the end, purity found me out, and even I, Saleem, was cleansed of my misdeeds. So he highly regretted to leave behind the multicultural setup of Bombay, where, as he tells, in Bombay, the number of deities were outnumbering the population. So he was just quite attached to the multicultural diversity of Bombay and, of course, India. Whereas back at Pakistan, the monocultural setup or the purity of religion made him a misfit, and he was condemned for that. So the cultural transplantation found quite difficult for Saleem Sinai. So the cultural transplantation of the migrants leaves them to cope with a new world. Quotes, I quote from Rushdie's Imaginary Homelands, right? And this is, of course, challengeable. These migrants struggle hard to survive in the hostile environment far away from their cultural roots. And of course, Saleem Sinai is no exception. Now comes the triple disruption of a migrant. So Rushdie, in his Imaginary Homelands, illustrates that a full migrant suffers triple disruption. So the three factors like place, language, and society determine the stability of any individual. So I quote from Imaginary Homelands, Rushdie's Imaginary Homelands. He loses his place, he enters into an alien language, and he finds himself surrounded by beings whose social behavior and codes are very unlike and sometimes even offensive to his own. And this is what makes migrants such important figures, because roots, language, and social norms have been the three of the most important parts of the definition of what it is to be a human being. So the migrant who is denied all three is obliged to find new ways of describing himself, new ways of being human. So here Rushdie reiterates by saying that roots, language, and social norms are very important to define a human being. Yes, so when denied all these three things, of course, the migrant will be disintegrating his identity. So displacement results in the migrants craving for their past cultural land, and Saleem is no exception. Saleem's lost memory. Saleem gets hit by a spittoon and loses his memory, and now begins a new phase in his life in Pakistan. So Saleem says, I am stripped of past, present, memory, time, shame, and love. Of course, he was wiped out of all memories. He was emptied of family, memories, as well as history. The lost memory indicates his lost identity. So he serves the army for the tracking of an intelligence unit as a tracker dog. And he, of course, becomes submissive. So Saleem in the Sundarbans. So he gets lost in the jungle of the Sundarbans during the war. And until regaining memory, he was referring to him in third person. Remember, a human being who has lost his memory, doesn't knew who he was, and he forgot everything from his past. And now he refers to himself in third person. He didn't know who he was, and he was bitten by a snake, and he was numb to the snake bite pain. And 2 days later, he regains memory, and he regains everything except his name. He couldn't identify who he was. Of course, he was able to gather all the past, and he is rejoined to the past. His self is unified, except that he could not remember his name. However, he remembers his name only when he meets his childhood friend Parvati the witch, as she calls out his name. Well, so we could see that the identity of Saleem Sinai is under stake. Saleem gets severed from his past, and his disintegrated self coincides with that of Rushdie too, as the writer himself is severed of his ties with his homeland. So, uh, thus, Saleem Sinai begins narrating his disintegrated identity to Padma, right? So, this is all about the dislocation and migration, and of course the identity crisis of Saleem Sinai. Of course, this is such a vast novel, and we need many presentations to cover the entire novel. But of course, I just thought I would cover the migration and other exile and other identity crisis of Saleem Sinai, so that we could correlate with those of Rushdie's too. So, hope you listen to the session, and thank you for watching. And those who haven't yet subscribed, please do subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell icon for further notifications. Thank you.